have been since 2018. And part of my, I guess you can say, volunteering is right now is taking care of the fruit trees in the garden space here at the demo garden. Next to me is Chace Anderson. He is also a master gardener, a lot longer than I've been, and at the same time, he assists with maintaining the fruit trees around here. For those that don't know, we kind of break up this garden into segments, and there's different individuals. We have an individual that takes care of the grapes, and that's next month for anybody that does grapes. So you can come over here and get a demonstration on how to prune grapes. We have people that do roses, we have a rock garden, we have wild grasses, raised beds. So there's different individuals that kind of take that under their wing and then make presentations during the course of the year on how to properly do it. So pretty much I'm into fruit trees. Chace has fruit trees at his house, and together we take care of this place with a lot of other people that actively get involved. So immediately I'd like to ask, everybody here have fruit trees? Yeah. Okay. Young fruit trees, mature fruit trees, all across the board? Young, okay. Young. Potted? Well, I have never done a potted fruit tree, so I might have to turn any questions you have over to somebody else. So anyway, I came back to this county in about 2014 to my family's place. During the course of my absence, the orchard that we did have got decimated. Nobody took care of it basically because we rented the house. No blaming. But anyway, so I started fresh, so I have a fairly young orchard, 21 trees right now, and still I plant about three to five trees a year to get the place back up and running. So, huh?
What kind of trees?
All across the board. I have cherry, apricot, peach, apple, pear. So yeah, I probably missed one or two in there too. So anyway, to start off with, has anybody done any pruning yet? This year? No. Okay. First off, with young trees, personal experience, the first year or two after planting, there's not much pruning that needs to be done. Mainly you're looking for things that, if the branches are diseased, broken, something of that nature, you want to remove those type of branches. But basically you're just looking for the structure of the tree, or trying to establish the structure of your tree, okay? And one of the handouts here, they talk about there's three different methods: central leader, another one is multiple leaders, where you see 3 or 4 coming off, and then they call it a modified leader, where you have one established leader with the, I want to point out, see that apple tree right there? It's got multiple leaders coming off of the base of the trunk there, and it's got 4 of them.
Yeah.
So some people would call that a modified, others would just say it's not a central leader, basically. So that particular tree, I don't know how old it is, but that's the way it was shaped. Next to it, you'll see the 2 younger apple trees. Those again have multiple leaders coming off of it, but the one on the very end, you will see it has a central leader and then a couple of laterals coming off the base of the tree. So it all depends on what you want to do with the tree. For me, pruning is important to establish height, open up the internals on the tree itself so it has good airflow, good sunlight. At the same time, I'm concentrating on any growth into the internal of the tree. I don't really want that. I prefer it to be out or up. The other thing, as I get older, and the higher I get off the ground, all of a sudden I don't like climbing ladders too much. So I brought a couple of tools here to show you later, but I try to keep all my trees about 10, 12 foot tall. That way, if I'm on an 8-foot ladder, I'm not more than 6 feet off the ground. And then I use an extended pole sometimes to cut on the internal of the tree, and then use hand pruners to do the circumference of the tree itself. What else are we going to talk about here? So again, first thing we're going to be looking for, if we walk up to a tree, we want to see what kind of shape we want out of that tree. When they're very young, it's kind of hard to see what that shape's going to look like, but after the first year or two, you'll start to see what it's going to be looking like. and what you can shape it into. The height consideration, a lot of times I will, later on today, if you're interested, we'll go over and just point out a few things. But again, on the tree at year 3, year 4, you want to try to get rid of that growth that's going internal into the tree, and a lot of times they're crossing branches. You don't want crossing branches because when it's windy, you'll have chafing taking place, which opens up the internals on the branches, susceptible to disease or pests and all those type of things, and you want to avoid that at all costs. Okay. So last year, I'm sure most of you know that we had a surprise here in April. I had apricots, cherries, plums. I'm trying to think of what else, something else there. Peaches, all in full bloom. I had fruit set on my plums and my cherries, and then we had snow and a freeze. And I ended up with a bunch of little pieces of fruit about the size of the tip of the end of my finger that were totally black. So that happens up here, and I'm sure for most of you, how many have been up here, 3 or 4 years, 5 years? Okay, pretty much everybody. February is always a strange time of the year for us here. We go into what I call a false spring, and in that false spring, everything starts to swell, everything starts to bloom, and then all of a sudden, hasn't happened too much 4 or 5 years ago, but last year was a total surprise, and when you look out and see snow on trees that are in full blossom, it's basically killing everything off. So that's what we have to live with up here in this county. So, anyway, the only thing I did have that was successful, I did have some pears and I did have some apples last year. And I'm encouraged. I know there's a lot of people that come up here and they're going to raise lemons and oranges and just to forewarn you, they take special care. It takes special care over the apple or a pear tree or something like that. Okay. So let's get into some tools here. Again, I don't like working higher than 6 feet off a ladder, merely because I don't own a fruit ladder like this. And because of that, I'm working off of just a regular step ladder, 8-foot step ladder. And because of that, it can be unstable on the ground. So try to make it as stable as possible. At the same time, with the assistance of the extended pole or a tool like this, extended pruners, manage to keep it down to about 10, 12 foot tall. Again, I'll look at the shape of the tree. The first thing I'm going to address, because I don't want it over 10 or 12 feet, is if you notice on this pear tree right here, you see that first year growth on the very top, how it goes up 3 or 4 feet. I'll cut all that back down to probably the first or second node, what I call the node, which is a little area where every year the leaf comes out or possibly fruit. Okay, but I'll try to get the top of that tree down as much as possible, just on that first year growth. And then again, I'm looking for anything in that tree that's crossing branches, that has seen some chafing, or basically looks like it's diseased. You want to get that removed, anything of that nature. And then again, working on the shape. When it comes to the lateral, when you come off the laterals, you see the other first year growth coming off of there. I might cut that back a third. So take a third off the top of it. Mainly, I just want to maintain shape. Again, and I'm gonna backtrack here because I did miss one point. Unfortunately, due to the garden size here, a lot of our trees are spaced very close together, and because of that, it's something you need to think about as you plant trees. You can help me out here, Chace. A standard tree, typically, you want like 20, 25 foot spacing between the trees. A semi-dwarf, about 15 foot of spacing between the two trees. And of course, a dwarf tree, you might get by with about 10 foot of spacing between the trees. And it all depends on what you plan on doing with it in the future as far as trimming it and keeping the shape of it. If you let it grow, they're going to grow into one another like you see around in this garden. So,
if you're planting a tree, think about what it's going to look like in 20 years, not in 2 years. Because invariably, people plant their trees too close together, and when they become mature, they're growing into each other. We have 3 apples in a row here, and they are much too close together. But as Steven said, part of it's because of the confining space we have to work with. We don't have too many stone fruit trees right there, but there are 3. There were 3 that we've taken out in the last 6 years because they were so crowded. When the trees were first planted, way too many were planted close together. So if you haven't planted your trees yet, give more space rather than less space between them, and think about what they'll look like in 10, 15, or 20 years, rather than what they'll look like in 2 years.
Now, something else up here in this county, well, I'm sure it's out as well, but when I plant my young trees at my place, gophers are a big problem. And besides the gophers, it is deer. Okay? I'm sure you all have similar problems up here. So, I typically, when I'm getting ready to plant my trees, will build a 3-foot, what I call a 3-foot gopher basket. 3-foot across gopher basket, typically about 2.5, 3 foot deep. Of course, you're gonna have to dig a hole for that before I plant my tree in there, because there's nothing more disheartening than going out there one day and saying, man, that thing just doesn't look right. And then you keep looking at it, and about a week later, you realize that something's happened, and you grab it, young tree, and you pick it up, and all you see is the grafting knot left on the tree itself. So, again, well, there's nothing you can do with the big trees, man. Eventually, the big trees establish themselves enough, the gophers aren't going to hinder them. It's just the young trees. It's just the young trees. So, next is the deer up here. My experience has been, you do well with them. When I say you're compatible with them, till about August when food gets scarce up here. And then they start to get a little more aggressive on anything that's green. And so because of that, you have to put cages around any young trees you have up here. And then, I'm not saying you all have to do this, but for me, at about year 5, year 6, I take my cages off. I let the deer, because the deer don't climb, but they will reach. So everything in my place, 5 years or older, is pruned up about this high come August, September. I just live with that, okay? Because mainly the reason I do that is because then I can get better access to the trunk of my tree. I can maintain it, I can paint it, I can put mulch around it. It is a little pain in the butt though when you have to take cages off and put cages back on. It's just a little more work, but anyway, you do need to put cages around your tree, and I would say about 5 feet tall. Something else, just learning from my experience, is you have a young tree, it comes from wherever you buy it from. I get mine from Stark's Nursery. No endorsement, I'm just saying I get mine from Stark's Nursery because they do real well with the rootstock and the hardiness up here in this area. So because of that, most of my trees, not all, but most of my trees survive first, second year up here from that point. When you go to Lowe's, go to Wilco, go to, what's the other one? Tractor Supply. A lot of times you don't know what you're getting as far as the rootstock or the condition they've been in to get to that facility to be sold. So anyway, just what you want to do. And so anyway, because of the cages, a lot of times again, my mistake, I put a little 2-foot cage around it. Well, as soon as that tree went to get established, everything shot out, and then the deer came in and trimmed everything back to the cage. So, saw an interesting YouTube video where they go out and buy the 15-foot, 16-foot cement panels, where the cement wire that they put in concrete. Great idea. That's what I'm going to do on these 3 that I'm getting at. But anyway, it ends up making about a 5-foot radius. And then what you do is instead of locking it all in, you just fold over a couple of the wires so you can separate the wire, open up the cage, go work on the tree, and then close it back up so the deer don't get to it. But yeah, it's all about learning experience there. So keep that in mind. You got something else?
You went over the reasons why we prune. One of the other reasons, besides shaping height control, wind circulation is fruit production. That's another important reason, especially with the fruit trees. Stone fruit, apricots, peaches, plums, pluots, you can prune more heavily than the palms, things like apples and pears, because the fruiting spurs on apples and pears are on older wood, second, third, and older wood. Stone fruit, the fruit will set on the newer wood. So you can be more aggressive with the stone fruit than the others. You can prune more from your peaches, plums, and apricots than perhaps apples and pears. Two basic kinds of cuts are heading cuts and thinning cuts. A heading cut you do to limit size and height, and where you make a heading cut, you know, it's going to sprout from the tips wherever there were leaf buds. A thinning cut is where you go all the way back to the trunk or the main branch, and that's for shape more than anything else. You know, when you're making lots of prune cuts, you try to cut at a 45-degree angle, a quarter of an inch above a bud. On the side, you want the next sprout to go. So if you have young trees and you want to develop them into a bowl shape, which would be ideal, and the two smaller apple trees are great examples of the bowl shape, which gives air circulation in the middle, sunlight in the middle. Do that by, when the trees are young, selecting where you want the scaffolding branches to begin. I know I started planting fruit trees in the mid-'80s, and I was shocked the first time I went to a nursery and bought a bare root, and the person who sold it to me said, "Would you like me to do the first cut for you?" And I said, "Sure." And the bare root was about this tall, and he cut it right here, and I said, "My God, you've taken half of the tree I just bought." And he said, "Well, that's what you want to do. You want to cut a bare root down to 2 to 2.5 feet above the ground, where the scaffolding will begin." And that's what we've tried to do with the trees that have been planted recently. Some of these other trees that have kind of gotten away from us on shaping were planted when the garden first opened, long before most of us became master gardeners, and we've pruned them each year, trying to get them shaped, trying to promote fruit production, trying to limit height. But if you walk around and look at the trees, you're going to see problems here that you have at home. We have the same sort of cankers, we have the same sort of borers, we have fire blight, we have sunburn, all the things that your trees suffer from, we suffer from here. But as you've learned, I'm sure, a lot of it's trial and error, and for most of us, it's a labor of love and a hobby, so we just keep at it. I think those are pretty much the basics. One other thing I always tell people when they say, "Gosh, I'm a little bit scared to prune," I say, don't be. Jump in. Think of it like giving your 4-year-old son a haircut. If you cut a little too much, it's going to grow back. And if you kind of misshape it this time, you can reshape it next time and make it look a little better. My fruit trees I planted in 1986. I've lost some to borers, I've replanted others, but I've learned the hard way a lot of times, and I do it because I love to work with the trees.
Yeah. So I've got a peach tree at home that is, imagine this tree here, this pear, that sort of flies off and begins to, it's got the 4 branches, but it starts right at the ground, the one. So it's actually just a fork. So I've had people tell me how to cut the one off, because it's shooting out, and then have more of a trunk.
Something you got a water spout that maybe at some point in time got away from you? Well, I call it water spout, but is it below the graft line?
No, it's above the graft line.
It's above the graft line?
But it's just above the, it's fairly low. And I talked to one farmer, and he said, "Well, I'd probably leave it, but it looks like a week. It's looks to me like a weak spot potentially. What do you all think of that?
I would, without seeing it firsthand, I would recommend probably pruning it off and letting it
Letting the one take over?
take over, yeah.
If it's like a real sharp blade, the chances of it splitting eventually are greater.
Yeah.
And I had a master gardener tell me years ago when I was just beginning that I had a tree with a real sharp V, and he said, you know, you're going to promote rot in there. You really should take one off or cut the whole thing down and start over. And I took that advice. I did it, and I regretted it afterwards. I would say to you, do you like the shape of it? Are you happy with it?
Right now.
I believe it. If you're not, you can take one of those off and then promote that into a trunk and get scaffolding branches from that, and then you have a tree. I propagate a lot of trees, small trees, from seeds, cuttings, volunteers, and many times they'll be, when the trees are only this big, there'll be like 3. I'll take out 2 and then train that into a trunk. You can do that when they're small, much harder when it's a full-grown tree.
Some other things I'd like to, yeah, go ahead, ma'am.
I didn't understand where you get your trees.
It's a company called Stark Brothers.